Awesome. And let me share my screen. There we go. Thank you all. And I'm so happy to welcome all of you back to yet another important release from Karate Labs. We're going to talk about Xplorer today. There's a few demos that I plan to do on my laptop. So that's going to be exciting and hopefully entertaining for you folks. And that's the agenda that we have. In terms of housekeeping, we should be ending within half an hour, but in case you have Q&A and you want to stay on and do a back and forth, that's fine. But we would cover the main content that we intend to cover in 30 minutes, including the demos. So before we get into the real details of what Xplorer is all about, for some of you who may be new to Karate Labs, we have been around for a long time as an open source solution for primarily API testing. And uh, I'm the co-founder of Karate Labs, along with my co-founders also in the chat, who will be also helping with chat in case you have questions, Kapil. And yeah, we are 3 years old as a company now, building a business on top of Karate as an open source, open core solution. And Karate is famous for API testing. There's a lot of enterprise companies and teams using it for that. But Karate also does performance testing, API mocking, and even UI automation. Okay. So yes, we try our best to make the business of testing fun. And we've heard very good things from our users. So that keeps us going and motivated. Okay, so with that, why did we create Xplorer? And some of you already know Xplorer is very different. It is a big shift from the open source solution, which is code-based for API testing and so on. But we've been talking to a lot of enterprise users of Karate, and teams such as in IKEA, WorldPay, SAP, and a few others. They have been saying, yeah, our teams use a mix of tools, Postman, Insomnia, for example, and we would like to consolidate on one tool, and that clearly has advantages from a training, onboarding, and just costs perspective, as you can totally imagine. And Karate is great for developers, but we've always had that ask, can you make it simpler? Can we have no code, and so on? And I think, as all of you are well aware, that recently there have been a lot of changes in the pricing and cloud models of some of the existing solutions. And I'm sure a few names come to mind. And security is talked about a lot. It is a concern for a lot of enterprises. And we especially, one of the reasons Karate as an open source solution has been really popular is because a lot of our users are in domains such as finance, insurance, healthcare. They do not tolerate having any data, even if it's test data, information about URLs and sensitive secrets. They simply do not tolerate these going into somebody else's cloud, which is what happens a lot nowadays. So with that, I'll come back to the slide to make sure I've hit all the points, but it's time to do a demo. So Xplorer is a true cross-platform application. Here I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to open it from the applications I have installed. Works on Windows, works on Linux, which is actually something our users requested. So we have a Debian version, and straight away it's ready for you to actually make requests. This particular HTTP request, took just a few milliseconds clearly. And straight away, you can see one of the things that actually differentiates Karate Xplorer, which is, it is, yes, a very simple no-code option to make HTTP/API calls. But on the right, you can see this very nice business-friendly way of looking at responses, okay? We have a few more examples. In fact, let me take this. This is a simple example of chaining the data that you get from the first request. We got a booking ID that is plugged into the path of the second request. And another thing that you may have picked up now is that how we really put a lot of focus on calling APIs in a sequence, okay? And this can get really, long. For example, if I take this other sample, and by the way, what I'm doing is actually loading up samples that are built in to make it easier for users to onboard, to Xplorer. And if I run this, you can see straight away, this is a nice story in terms of what an API can do. For a particular booking, you would do a post, see if you got the booking, try to do a search query based on username, see these bookings and all that. And of course, you can see right at the end, you even have a put and a delete. So we're doing this true CRUD, full life cycle over a resource, which is what the whole world of REST and HTTP is all about, and what makes APIs, actually, click, and they are simple at the same time. Okay, so that's a lot about Xplorer. To give you another example of how this is designed for you to play around, in fact, one of the inspiration for Xplorer is, some of you are familiar with Jupyter notebooks in the world of AI and so on, the Python notebooks. So I'm going to do another thing, which is I'm going to redo a post, which is the first request. And then if I do a get, and then redo that again and do another get, you will see, okay, we've added a third booking, and this is one nice way where, similar to some kind of SQL tools, you can play around and explore APIs, hence the name Xplorer. Before I move on, because today's focus is about some of the open API stuff, I know a lot of you are excited to see that. So I'll just give you a glimpse of one of the other things which is interesting about Xplorer, which is, let's look at this. When I run this request, you see that it's actually rendered a very nice HTML table rather than raw JSON. If you want to look at the JSON, it's still available, like here. But this output tab is something new, and a lot of users like it, which you can actually tell Xplorer, hey, if you get a JSON array as the response, which is very typical, you can actually neatly lay it out in a table. You have control over the table. That is an advanced feature of Xplorer, and you can certainly look at the documentation to figure out how to do this, and even more advanced use cases. Okay, so that was the basics of Xplorer. I'll just flip back to the slides to ensure I haven't missed anything. Yes, the business-friendly grid view. And yes, you can export to Karate test. That's important. Obviously, one of the things you may want to do once you have just explored APIs is, okay, now I want to formalize this test and move it to a Karate test. And yes, you can actually do this cut and paste straight from the bottom right and put it into your IDE or Karate. And a reminder of what Karate gives you when you go to CI/CD pipelines is you can run your tests in parallel. They will always run, in GitHub Actions or Jenkins. And you can reuse these functional scripts as performance tests. Okay. So let's now move on to the OpenAPI and Swagger support of Karate Explorer. This is where, I think a lot of you, are interested. This is the new feature that we dropped last week. And let me head over to this import tab. Okay, and let me also just clear up what we have on the left. In fact, just delete that. Give us a little more space. And you can, of course, paste from a URL. Let me just go to a file that I already have. Now, this rsv.json is actually a very large, complicated Swagger file. Happens to be for the business of hotel reservation, as you can clearly see from the endpoints. And I want to make a comment here. I have seen the world of OpenAPI and Swagger for a long time. And one of the things that I didn't really enjoy as a developer having to use OpenAPI specifications is that, they are typically rendered as these very large HTML files that you have to scroll for ages to actually get to the, parts that you're interested in. And you can see, of course, I can search here for anything that is a reservation and all that, or batch, or notif, or let's say awards. Yeah. You get the point. You can easily narrow down on any particular operation that you're interested in. And let me just select this one for the demo. And straight away, you see, one of the other nice things that I think we do a lot better than traditional API documentation is the fact that we bring everything to you. You can eyeball all the information about that operation in one shot, including all the extra documentation and all that. And yeah, you can click on all the elements. You can, if you want to see the individual documentation about all those things. But this is the best part. We actually do a lot of work behind the scenes to take all the schema information. And I know a lot of you are in big enterprises. You probably have these reusable JSON schemas that are kind of scattered all across your specifications. But when you have zoomed into this post operation for that path, you can now look at the request and also the response if you want. But let's focus on the request. You can actually see the details of each. Hang on, yeah. You can see the details of each element of the JSON. And by the way, some of you have noticed when there are array elements, repeated array elements, we have this very nice color coding with that green line and all that. Super useful. So you can easily make out visually what kind of JSON you're dealing with. And yes, we support all those, somewhat esoteric stuff like all off, one off, any off, and so on, all the JSON schema complications. In case you're wondering, we support all versions of Swagger and OpenAPI. And if I were to summarize what we're trying to do here with all of this rich UI that we are presenting, we want to actually make it as easy as possible for you, if you already have an OpenAPI or a Swagger spec, to make your first live successful API call to the endpoint that you're interested in. And this, as some of you know, most of you would agree, I think, is kind of complicated. For simple APIs like the pet store example, which you always keep seeing, super simple. But look at this example. This is a pretty complicated schema. I'm going to show you the next option, which is interesting, which is now I can select particular different parts of the JSON that I'm interested in. And you can see on the right, you are actually building, the JSON, and you're kind of confident that this JSON is going to be valid in terms of the JSON shape and the schema. And if you have examples, because that was a big question that we got from our users, right? A lot of our users have actually invested a lot of time in creating this wonderful API documentation ready API specifications or open API specifications. And some of them have examples to the extent where they have these different shapes of JSON payloads embedded as examples in the specification file. And if you have that, you can select that. I'm going to show you an example of, in this case, let me zoom into the method. The method happens to be an enum, okay, for a single field. And you can see, okay, I'm going to say here, I'm going to select method. And it defaults to get, which is the first enum. But watch this, if I select another one and click this button to say add, it swaps that enum that you just selected. And I'm sure a lot of you have kind of, clicked as to what this means, because it just means you should be able to create a JSON that's valid for your API, in a few minutes. And watch as I can now plug in the remaining details. I can put in these two values, which are mandatory path parameters. And the moment I say add to sequence, watch on the left, you actually get ready to use, API call that you can now run in Xplorer. And of course, if that works, you can kind of promote it to a karate test if you wish, or keep it in Xplorer. It's up to you. That was a lot about the OpenAPI and Swagger support. Keep in mind that you can also open Postman and curl and HER. So all those typical sources of API data are supported. But I think I've covered the real highlight of this release, which is, if you have invested as a team, and that I think, represents many teams out there working with APIs. If you have invested a lot of time in creating these specifications that you evolve as your project evolves, you can actually tap into that and start really putting that to good use. You can unlock the value that you have in your specifications. And I think some of you know that the world of API specifications is just going to become more interesting now, because a lot of the AI agentic approaches are depending on you having APIs. And if you have good documentation, even better for the agents. Great. I will not do a demo of this, but I'm mentioning this because I know there's a lot of companies out there who have a lot of Postman collections. So if you want to start, kind of moving them into Explorer, it's a very similar to the experience that you just saw for OpenAPI. It's something absolutely easy to do. So now I'm moving to the last phase of this presentation, which is the AI word, and a lot of you were expecting this clearly. AI is all the rage. But I want to make this observation that you may or may not agree with me on about API testing versus other kinds of automation, especially UI automation. Now, it is my belief that to make an API call, there's only one right way to make an API call. It is a very technical thing. API is almost like making a method call or a remote procedure call. And if you have a typo, or if you miss one JSON field, or the shape of your JSON is wrong, it's not going to work. Most APIs are just going to reject it, give you an error, and so on. And in my mind, you see many test automation tools out there evolving, computer use, and so on. The business of clicking buttons on a screen and kind of pretending to be a human and working through a user interface, I believe the world of APIs is very, very different. It's a lot harder. It's simpler in some ways, but when it comes to getting an LLM to make a successful API call, I believe they need handholding. Okay. And enter MCP. I'm not going to explain what MCP is. I think all of you have heard of it by now, or deep dived, because it's amazing the way that it just exploded just from November. And now every big entity out there, Google, Anthropic, OpenAI, Microsoft, they all support it. And what it means is you can actually start getting your LLMs to collaborate with tools and do more rather than this, just chat box window that all of you are familiar with. Now, what I'm going to demo next is I'm going to start Explorer as an MCP server and show you what happens, what are the implications. And I'm going to use Claude as the LLM, the second column. And the takeaway from this is that once you combine an LLM and tools that help the LLM to do work, to be specific, the demo I'm going to do is use the LLM to test an API and also move it to Explorer. Okay. And I'm going to show you the MCP support in Explorer. By the way, a lot of you who have tried MCP probably know you kind of install this npm module and you run some code. Explorer is already this legitimate signed binary that runs on your machine. So security-wise, I think it's already in a good place. And when I click this button to start the server, it started. Okay. Now, when I start Claude, you'll see on the right, a couple of logs come up just to indicate that Claude has connected successfully and so on. I'm going to close this. So that was how easy it was to, point Claude to Explorer and, get things going. And let me, resize a few things for the sake of demo. I have this toy API running locally, which also has a UI. I've already put 2 entries into this API. And what I will do is I can show you that if I go to this URL, which is /API/todos on localhost, I'm already getting data. And the demo that I'm going to do is that LLMs, in this case, Claude, and a reminder, right? The whole point of MCP is that if you don't want to use Claude in your organization and you are already having a contract with OpenAI or something like that, no worries, you can plug and play. Okay. So I'm going to say make a call to that URL and then do some CRUD testing. Yep. And I brought out the log. Yeah. And you can see that on the left, Claude is now starting to make these API calls, and I'm hands-free at the moment. And the very interesting and nice thing about this flow is that it's pretty autonomous and it's quite smart enough to figure out, okay, based on the response that I got, these should be the API HTTP method operations that exist. And it does a pretty good job of actually, trying to behave like someone testing the whole life cycle of CRUD. You can see it's actually done a delete, and very helpfully at the end, it even gives you a nice summary, which is awesome. So I'm a big fan of this way of working. To be honest, it's been a very nice experience. So great. We have this test. What's next logically is I'm going to watch what I type. It's just add this sequence to Xplorer. Okay. And this is true remote control, right? This is a great example of the power of LLMs and MCP, which is okay. You may be a user that doesn't want to understand Explorer. You don't want to read through the documentation of Explorer and figure out how to use that. It's a relatively complicated UI for the right reasons. But the moment you say, hey, Claude, please, you do this hard work of creating the sequence. And so it's helpfully even given us some nice labels for all the calls. I'm going to switch to wide mode just to show you that, hey, there is a slightly less cluttered way of presenting. And wow, this is actually a very large flow. Let's that's amazing. And there you go. I was able to run that whole flow, and including puts and deletes, and it works fine. So let's make another post and get all of them and see if, yeah, it's working fine. So just to give you a sense of what is possible, you can even do things. Okay. Let's start a new chat, and I'm not going to run this whole demo, but some of you may be familiar with this very helpful test playground for an API, a realistic looking API that's there on the web. And just to give you some ideas, I can say, please test this API. Okay. And it would actually go ahead and do it. So this clearly is, you know what, I'm not going to go through with this. It would actually, take a long time and actually test every single endpoint, including looking for, differences between the specification. So I'm sure all of you have realized this is very powerful. Some of you may be experiencing this kind of a way of working already in your, day job and so on. But yeah, we are kind of excited. We have a few more things to talk about, which is, yeah, AI integration, what I just demonstrated, including, being able to reuse documents or sources of data about the API. Very, very powerful concept. I'm not going to do this demo, but I think we'll post a link in the chat right now on this video if you're interested. But the point here is that when there are some APIs that are so complicated that you really have to have domain knowledge about that API, or you need to be an expert in the backend for that API, the way to handle that is to actually write one adapter. A lot of people are doing that using MCP nowadays. We have some thoughts on how to make that easier with Karate, but one of the things we have released as a specific solution for insurance is this custom adapter. There are more details in the link that's going to be in the chat. And finally, I knew some of you would be asking this question, so let me preempt. Security is a big question mark for MCP. We know that. We are very, very cautious of that. So yeah, some of you know this already, but yes, a very valid concern. The more MCP tools you add, we are already starting to see this problem where there are so many MCP tools created by all kinds of people all over the world that when you start a tool like Claude, Claude is going to get confused looking at all the potentially conflicting prompts that are in scope. Okay. The short of what we are saying here is that the last line, there is definitely going to be a demand for local only solutions. And the good news is that I think we are reaching a point where a lot of these open source LLMs can actually run locally, right? It's taken a long time, but a lot of people have been working on this. And I think if you see this last slide that I have, this is our vision for the future. I really wanted all of you to, hear this from us as Karate Labs that we are very actively working on this. We know that a lot of you enterprise users cannot use any LLM perhaps, right? Because your organizational standards say you can't make any calls outside your firewall. You can't risk losing sensitive data or leaking sensitive data to the cloud. Or you may be having an LLM that you are allowed to use, and it's currently locked down within your environment. So we are actively working on this. We don't have an ETA, but we expect this to be ready in a very short time. That is, everything is in Xplorer. There's no question about you having to start some other weird process just for the sake of having agents work on your system. You'll have this one single window where you say, I want to do API testing. You can even go to the extent of sandboxing or quarantining some URLs, right? Which is very important. You should not have the risk of the agent just going off and making calls to some random server where your credentials are getting exposed and so on. So there are many things that we can control if we own the whole agent loop. And at the end, as we say, you would be able to bring your own LLM. Okay. With that, I think I've covered all that I wanted to cover. And I think you got a glimpse of Xplorer and how it can up-level your API testing needs, especially being able to work with OpenAPI and Swagger specifications where you already have invested time and you perhaps want to reuse that. With that, I think we have time for a few questions. As I said, we can go stretch if there are more questions, but let me go through the chat. Is Xplorer helpful in UI testing? Thanks, Manisha, for the question. No, Xplorer is very focused on API testing, but you never know, right? To be very honest, our focus is API testing. We have a long-term view that once we figure out how to make local LLMs work for API testing, yes, we would look at UI testing. There are a lot of companies in that space, so it's really, really crowded. Another reason why we are very focused on API testing. Thanks for the question. I don't see any other questions, but you know how to reach us. And if you have more questions, feel free to email
There's
me.
a question in the Q&A. You might want to touch on
So
that.
my bad, I probably haven't figured out how to look at the Q&A. Give me a minute. Q&A, yes. Xplorer supports SOAP from Letitia. Thanks for the question. The question is, does Xplorer support SOAP? Yes. To be very honest, right now, so SOAP would work. If you make the request for SOAP, it will work. The problem is we still haven't done the syntax coloring and maybe the XPath support that you would need for SOAP. So if you really feel this is important, reach out to us directly. We have ways of prioritizing things when we know that we have to solve for enterprise customer needs. So that's that. Benjamin, good to see you here. And you have a question. If Explorer directly had the capability to mock an endpoint, you know what? I didn't go through it because it's one of those advanced features, but if I quickly share my Claude, um, you know, yeah, at the bottom, those of you who know MCP and Claude, you can see that you can actually look at all the available MCP tools. And here's a surprise. There's actually this HTTP mock server. Do play around with it. If you want a trial, we can set it up for you, Benjamin, for your team. But short answer is we have some thoughts on how to make the writing of mock servers easier. And when you combine it with, use an OpenAPI spec, create a mock based on that works against the spec, and then create tests for that. I think we're heading a very, very interesting direction. And we have a lot of thoughts and actively are working for that. Will the pricing model change once LLM is fully integrated? Great question. I know, Kapil, if you want to chime in on the chat or on audio, please do that. Right now, we have no plans. We have that one pricing model for Explorer and the premium features. So that remains. But in the future, if there are more that we add to what you've seen, right, that would be a totally different discussion, but it's too early to call. I see another question with the focus. Will the open source version gonna take a backseat in terms of future enhancements? Yeah, answer is absolutely no. The open source is a very different track. It's always been MIT licensed. There are still contributions and still active work happening. So yeah, I can very much guarantee that. In fact, we have a big update on the open source version planned in a couple of months from now on, including support for two things: code coverage for APIs, which has been a big ask from all our enterprises. So the short answer is that particular feature in open source absolutely going to be free, open source. Anyone can use it. Any number of licenses, no limits, no caps, MIT license, and so on. So thanks for that question. That's it. I think we have 1 minute over. We started 1 minute late. And thank you all again for joining. I know, thanks for taking time, and happy testing. Have a good day. Thank you all.